All right, so look, we got a lot to cover in a half hour, and I'm going to talk New York fast. So here's the thing. If you go back, I don't know, even 5, 6 years ago, there was this whole discussion going on around customer acquisition. And the idea was, okay, well, we have to figure out the way we're going to acquire customers and so on and so forth. And there was a explosion of discussions around the idea that, you know what, you don't acquire customers the way you used to because traditional methods of marketing, et cetera, didn't work. And that, in fact, the battle was a battle not for getting people to read a marketing thing, was a battle just simply to get their attention before you even got their interest, right? And if you think about it then, you were being bombarded every day by what was estimated to be 3,000 messages every single day of the week, 7 days, 1 million a year. That's you individually. And for the most part, as a result of that, you ignored, of that 1 million a year, 999,920, and maybe paid attention to 80 the whole year. That led, for example, to you doing something that your whole life when you were younger you would do, which is open up snail mail and read it to the point where you didn't even look at it, which you still don't. Now, that was before we were using the term big data. But it was the beginning of the explosion of big data. And what is it? Okay, but before we get into that, because you know, we were talking about it this morning, and Esteban Kolsky, who's a thought leader in this space, said it's big noise. And he's right, actually, as we'll see. Here's a quote from a guy I actually politically despise. He's real sort of a conservative type. We have to find a way to make the important measurable rather than the measurable important. Just because it's capturable, just because it's reportable, doesn't mean it's important, right? He's saying that what we have to do is figure out what's important to us and then figure out how to get a result that we can then act on effectively. And that core is the value of what you need to do with big data, and we're going to go through what that means. So here are a couple of conventional definitions. First one is the ZDNet blogger Andrew Brust, and this is more of the oh my God, help, help, help type. Big data is about the technologies and practice of handling data sets so large that conventional database management systems cannot handle them efficiently or at all. That's like the panic-stricken definition. The one below it is the don't worry, we got it under control version. Techniques and technologies that make handling data at extreme scale affordable. Reality is, look, we always have had lots of data out there. Eventually, the technologies catch up to the point we can actually handle it. At the point we can actually handle that, we have more data coming at us. We build the technologies and continue to advance. It's ongoing. It's going to be ongoing forever. The second definition is probably a little closer. But the thing that is ubiquitous about big data is that there is lots of it, and it's continual. As of now, we have what's called 1.8 zettabytes. A zettabyte is 10 to the 21. The estimation is by 2015, 7.9 zettabytes. Okay, that's interesting, that's broad, that's amorphous, nice. But there are a lot of characteristics that actually apply to the concept of big data, and we have to start looking at that. Number one was the one you just heard, which is volume. But let's break it down a little bit when you're looking at volume here. Look, you're talking about not just what we normally think of as big data, which is the unstructured mass out on the social web, that involves conversations on external social networks and so on and so forth. But it's also RFID chips and sensor data. It's also the fact that 2 billion people are watching YouTube. Here's an interesting thing. So when I was putting together all these things, and these tweets of mine were deliberately so I could cut and paste them and put them on this slide. That's why I put them out. But you'll note the one right below the bottom one. It says, I did it at 2:53 p.m. It says more than 5 billion people are calling, texting, tweeting, and browsing websites on mobile phones. That's the amount of devices that are available to do it. And then this guy, MJ Cavaretta, at 3:19, tweets back, T-Mobile, misspelled, 2 petabytes of data for over a 60-day period, basically. But you know what's interesting? His return tweet is more data. So he's creating data by responding to my tweets on data while he's telling me about data. So we're talking about, and then he's also talking about a link, and the minute anyone clicks on that link, it's more data, right? So all of these things are being taken into account when we're looking at big data just in terms of volume. But again, we're not just talking about the customer-facing stuff that we're all used to. We're talking about what's going on at the back end of this, too. All the kinds of data that an RFID system produces, which is 1,000 times more than a typical barcoded system. So that's volume. But then you got velocity, too. It's coming at you. And it's coming at you in real time. And it's constant. And it's changing. And it's moving. And it's something that you may have to respond to in that time. I'll give you an example, and kind of a nice example, which also goes to the heart of the Yankees, by the way. In 2009, I was in Bogota, Colombia. I was giving a speech, and I was done with the speech, and it was right in the middle of the World Series, and I knew the Yankees were going to win the World Series, and it was Game 6. So I kind of blew off a client dinner so I could go watch the game in my hotel in Colombia. And I was at the hotel, and I found it on TV set, which had 250 channels. I found it in Spanish, right? I took, high school Spanish, so it wasn't that I understand. And it's Colombian Spanish, which is not the same as the Spanish you learn in high school either. So I said, okay, I got to find some way of listening to this thing. So I went on an iPhone. I found the Yankees station. I started listening to the Yankees broadcasters. Okay, here's where the big data part comes in. I then logged into Twitter, #Yankees, and #Phillies, who we were playing at the time. And I had my Twitter account linked to my Facebook account. So every tweet I put out went to Facebook. That night, throughout the game, from the beginning to the end, I interacted with literally thousands of people in an ad hoc network that was created by the interaction of the people among millions of people all in all from all over the world. On Twitter, I had one tweet, for example, that generated a 94-message stream on Facebook. That's all data, right? But here's the interesting thing, because we're talking about how to take action on this stuff. At the end of that night, remember the last comment was this guy, David Sims, who's a freelance writer. He lives in New Zealand, and he was watching the game, and he said, oh, that was great, good series. See you next year, which unfortunately didn't happen. And the interesting thing is, I want you to think about something. All right, so there's all this data, right? There's how much information are you getting about what people like, dislike, all the trash talking going on, but you're getting the likes and dislikes of people throughout the night. There's tons of sentiment going on, but it's momentary and it's ad hoc, meaning it came right at you like a tsunami. Now, I want you to imagine this scenario, and I actually talked to Major League Baseball, specifically all the teams, about this. Imagine if at that point, somewhere before that guy said, see you next year, and the whole thing dissolved, and all that data just went off into the ether. Imagine if, say, a guy from the Yankees got on and said, hey, thanks for helping us get here. We did it. The party moves over here. And they have giveaways. They have a community set up where people can just go over and virtually continue the party. You're talking about merchandise. You're talking about advocacy. You're talking about all kinds of things that they could have done to transfer that, take an action that would have transferred all that data into not only actionable information for them, but the actual actions that would have led to probable merchandise sales, things like that, that night, being able to take into account the speed at which the data came at it. That's what we're talking about here when we talk about velocity. You have to be able to be ready because you've got a plan, and we'll get through that. You've got a plan to respond not just to the volume, but to that speed. Now, you could say, well, I'm just a small business. Why do I care about big data? You may not have to, right? Look, here's the point. It's there whether you care about it or not, right? This stuff doesn't disappear because you don't care to do anything about it. You choose to do what you want to do, and we'll go through how you can go about doing that. Whether you're big, small, or intermediate size, if you want to interact with your customers and the channels that they're acting on happen to be out in the social web, or if for some reason you're a small trucking firm and you need to get RFID data that you need to respond to some problems at some logistical site, with logistics at some site, you choose to do that. But you have to identify what you want out of it. Variability is another big issue of big data. And these are all the types of data we're talking about. Remember I said back end, front end? We'll take a look at it in detail. Is all the historic transactional data that we've had in CRM systems, right? The sales data and the case management data from customer service and maybe campaign responses and the like. There's the social web data, which we're talking about, but we're not just talking about text. We're talking about sentiment, and we'll get into an example of one that's kind of odd about that in a little bit. We're talking about data that's coming from communities. We're talking about data from mobile devices. We're talking about sensor data. We're talking about video data. Now, you got to understand, with all these data types, geospatial data, I saw an application, a business analytics application that was based on geospatial done by Esri, which is the largest mapping company in the world. And they had 7,000 variables for this thing. And it was amazing. They literally could identify the neighborhood and the houses that had the people who love to drink single malt whiskeys that are smoky and willing to spend more than $100 on it. Literally, it was that detailed. And then they would literally show you the map and the neighborhood and the houses, right? I mean, it was that. But that's the problem with all of this. There's a lot of stuff there, and we all think, oh, this is cool, it's great. The idea is what you're trying to do optimally is come up, if Paul Greenberg, I'm generating one thing from each of those pieces, you got to normalize all that to figure out me, right? Not to figure out each piece. You have to actually figure out how all of that makes me the kind of person that you will need to interact with, or am I that kind of person? Video data is very different than ordinary text data, which is even different than sentiment analysis, which is different than geospatial. You have to figure out how to overcome all that. That's one of the other issues of big data that's out there. So you have to pick and choose. Here's a study done by the IBM Institute for Business Value, which is free, by the way, and available to anyone who wants it. It's called Analytics, the Real World Use of Big Data. And they do the best research I know, really. They do spectacular research. Everything of theirs is free. Even though they're an IBM company, they actually have no actual agenda. That's IBM's agenda. So if you're looking for reliable, honest, agnostic, and well-respected research, check them out. But you'll note something very interesting. They looked at all the people who were doing big data work, and they found that most of the sources are traditional internal data. All the transactional stuff we've always looked at. Transactions, log data, events, and emails, all the stuff that is internal. That's where most people are still doing their work. But we're seeing an increase with social media and sensors, external feeds, and the like. But we're still early stage in terms of how we figure all this big data stuff out. Now, this is not a small effort. You'll see on these numbers up here, you're talking numbers that say 28 billion, 34 billion, 16.9 billion just in the direct tools market, and storage market. I mean, that's a lot of money out there, meaning there's a lot of people applying themselves to trying to actually take care of how to handle big data so that it provides us with some sort of actionable insights that we can use to actually further our businesses. And there are challenges that are amazing and tough, but challenges that are meetable. And here, I don't have a lot of time to go through this, so I'm going to pick one and I'll show it to you, but take a look at this list. I mean, you're looking at what I talked earlier. You notice where it says velocity response? It says predictive window. That's Michael Wu's work on big data, who I highly recommend also. He's out of Lithium on the West Coast. What that basically says is, look, you're going to get information that's of value to you, like I described with the Yankees, right? You're going to have to respond in a time or else it becomes not so valuable anymore, right? If you remember, I had, well, you might not have noticed it, but there was two other pieces to the components of big data. One was veracity, meaning how accurate is the data. But there was also what I said was uncertainty, meaning how accurate or useful is that data over time. By the time you see it, it might be too late, right? So there's all of those things are part of the components, and how you master all of that is essentially what we're aiming at. And I'm going to show you how it's done, right? So you're talking about storage, you're talking about accuracy, you're talking about that uncertainty, you're talking about just this enormous amount of it, period, the volume of it. But you're also talking about there's a skill shortage out there right now. There aren't enough people who know how to do it. You're talking no technology around it is perfect yet. So, we're kind of early on it, but we're at the stage where we are beginning to actually master this stuff. But look, so let's take one example of what we're talking about when we say a challenge. So we got the challenge of accuracy. Now, I'll give you some amazing examples here. So this says, you're analyzing big data, and don't forget, you're not sitting there and reading everything. You've got algorithms working to get you there. But these algorithms have to be accurate enough to provide you with something useful that you can use. But you've got industry-specific jargon and names. You can't really see that, but this is Brent and Mai's thing, right? CRM players, P-L-A-Y-A-Z. Now, how's your algorithm going to interpret that, right? I mean, CRM players, right? That's a very industry-specific thing. People in the CRM world know that. People outside the CRM world don't know that, right? So you have to figure that out. Look at the one on the top right. This one is actually funny. You got two problems with the accuracy side and clarity, too, which is there's misspelled words and there's really strange, emotionally interpreted data here. The one on the top right says from Trunks 0027. He hates, for whatever reason, this person, Trunks, hates Southwest Airlines, like hates it, right? And says, I find the at Southwest Air, and then it says effing themselves, that's why it's blacked out, right? Effing themselves with terrible policies, and meaning obviously policies, and bad customer service is great, love it. He loves the fact that they're effing themselves, basically, is what he loves, right? But just read the last line for a minute, by itself. How would you interpret that if you just saw the last line, right? I love Southwest, right? Absolutely love Southwest. This is literally the tweet. So when you're doing all these things to big data, you actually literally have to interpret that. And it says terrible polices. So if somebody has a keyword of police, what's going to happen, right? Obviously, since the keywords tend to be kind of fuzzy, it'll go over to something involving law enforcement, right? So you can see what you're actually dealing with when you're dealing with the issues here when it comes to accuracy and clarity. Here, abbreviations and contextual data. This one, which is sort of heartbreaking, actually, this says, it says retweet Joel Sherman, who happens to be a sports reporter, and it says, hashtag SF Giants with fewest HRs in MLB have 6 Rs in 5 innings v. hashtag Tigers, or as many as hashtag Yankees MLB HR leaders had in 4 GMs of ALCS. Now, if you're not a baseball fan, do you have any idea what that said? Right? Now, as a baseball fan, it's clear as bell to me. I understood every word. But the reality is, you don't know. You have no idea what that says. Yet, again, you're trying to understand a person. You're trying to understand a thing. You're trying to understand the nature of an event. You're trying to understand something that you can actually get, a small thing out of all this data and information with all these contextual things going on at all times. Here, you have this hashtag that says hashtag FF, that stands for Follow Friday. And if anyone in the Twitterverse knows that that means these are people who influence that person, right? So all those ads are theoretically influential people. But who knows that with hashtag FF? But, in that case, for example, if you're looking for influencers, you can actually figure that out. You put in, as part of what you're looking for, hashtag FF, right, and see what comes up. So there's ways that you can deal with this, but we're dealing with all this. And then, of course, just the most straightforward one, which is the visual data. You have to interpret that. It looks like that, though. It looks like that. It's not words. It looks like that. Yet they're working on the algorithms and the components to do that now. So what do you do? I mean, this sounds like, oh, my God, right? That's what it pretty much this is. Or, if we're going to industry abbreviations, OMG, right? So, right, it's like we're thinking about, okay, what do you do? How do you deal with all this? And again, I don't care what size, I truly don't care what size business you are. I mean, I'm not like saying that just for dramatic purposes. I actually don't care. The thing is that you have to take this from the standpoint of how valuable is getting information from all that stuff out there and your internal systems to you in advancing whatever objectives and hypothesis you have around this. And here's what you're looking at. So first things first, stop worrying about big data. It is, as Esteban called it, just big noise until you do something with it. Second thing, how do I put this? There's a saying that circulates the industry a lot. Listening is the first step. It's not. Taking action is the first step. Listening is the precursor to that. So start thinking about what it is you want from your customers, or what kind of information do you need for whatever objective you set. And that could be customer acquisition, it could be retention, it could be, as I said, it could be logistical stuff based if you're the back-end guy. But decide what you want and decide what data sources you need to go get the information so that you can get what you want. Develop some sort of idea of how to go about it. Test it, see if it works, right? Start extracting the information when you go to those sources. Pull it out, interpret it, and that means analyze it, right? And then with the insight you gain, act on it. And I'm going to go through a very specific example of a company that did this on a large scale with results. Because we're at a point now where we actually have opportunity with all those zettabytes. I always thought that was like, named after Michael Douglas's wife, right? We have opportunity with all those zettabytes out there to really make something of it and actually advance our businesses if we want to put in the time and effort to do it. Now, here's one example where it worked incredibly well. Obama had his big data guys. Romney had his big data guys, and what Romney's campaign was called Orca, killer whale, right? And it was pretty much a whale without the killer part, right? So what happened was Romney's campaign, even by their own admission, failed when it came to how they handled the interpretation of data. Completely failed. They let ideology get in the way. They basically, remember what I said? Measure what's important versus that's essentially what they did is said, ideology counts, we'll try to fit the data to that, right? And it didn't work. What Obama did was something called micro-targeting, which is this time-honored thing that's been done in politics for years. And micro-targeting very well says something very simple. It says, if this person is like this, meaning they have, I'm going to invent something here, but they have an income of $110,000. They like driving Porsches, although on $110,000 I doubt they do. But they like driving Porsches. They wear white tennis shoes. They vote liberal. They buy, they're diamond buyers or whatever. I mean, just whatever they do, right? They take all this data and then they can actually determine the proclivity the person has to vote, right? What kind of vote they're going to get. And Obama's campaign had just huge amounts of data. They went out and collected. I know my wife was actually out collecting it, right, at one point during the campaign. And these are some of the things, you see it. Notice the bottom one, though, and the top one. The standard stuff's in the middle. Demographics, voter registration, voter preference, and history. But also likes and social information. They were using Facebook. They were getting data from everywhere. Now, here's what's interesting, and this happened to me explicitly. Take a look at this thing on the right. I got this email. It said, will you make one call for President Obama? Reply, call, blah, blah, blah. I did. And I got this. The number's blacked out of the phone number of the person. It said, call Amy in Florida. I live in Virginia. Okay, I'm a guy. Yet, here's what the data showed. The Obama campaign matched Amy to me, explicitly. Not generally, explicitly. Paul is likely to influence Amy getting out to vote based on all those patterns that emerged and the relative, and it's called someone like me, meaning Amy is someone like Paul. Therefore, Paul call Amy. And believe me, Amy got the same email, and I don't know, she didn't call me, but you get the point. That's how deep Obama went to this. And you know, the effect, of course, was dramatic. I mean, there were 4 or 5 states that were identified that he won because of that kind of thing explicitly. Among them, I don't count on my memory here. I just remember one of them was West Virginia. That's all I remember. But there are 3 other ones. I just don't remember which. So the idea is that that works. There's a result. And in this case, it was a result that helped him win the election. Right? But there's one more thing we're going to go into. All right. How are we doing on time, by the way? Okay. All right. I'll tell you what. I'll go to the. Here are some of the use cases that that are actually right now in action. You're getting retail coupons based on purchase patterns. You're getting social media analytics and market trends associating with individuals so that you say, okay, this person is likely to respond to this particular message based on this market trend and their buying habits. You've got risk management it's being used for. You've got fraud detection. I'm not going to go through any of that. I'm going to take you through churn management here. All right. One of the biggest problems in the telco industry, as you know, is churn. Well, it's in any industry, is churn, meaning you're going to lose your customers to someone else. And in telco, it's particularly pronounced because there are multiple ways you can lose your customers to someone else. You know, there's the standard churn, which means, you know, essentially you go because you're dissatisfied. There's promotional churn, which says the customer is giving you the other telcos are giving you a better offer. And then contagious churn, which is, you know, this guy is an influencer and he says he's quitting, I'm quitting too. All right. Now keep that in mind as we go through this. Just look at this Skype number on the top for a minute. That's just Skype. Okay, now I want you to take every telco in the world in combination with all the VoIP providers like Vonage and Skype, and then start thinking of numbers. This is voice video. This doesn't even count regular phone, any of this. Voice video alone. Skype in 2010 had 207 billion minutes of voice video. Okay, so we're dealing with enormous amounts of data and information here. That's just Skype. All right, we're going to go through a company called Telenor, which is out of Norway. This is a big company, though. It's a $17 billion company. It's one of the largest mobile operators in the world. It has 203 million subscribers. All right, they had a churn problem, and their churn problem was defined by their competitors providing low-cost alternatives, and they were losing a lot of people, and they were saying, how do we actually reduce churn? All right, and what they did is they took very large data samples, but they took them from their internal data mostly, not so much social data in this case. That's their next round of doing it. They did what's called uplift modeling. I'm not going to go through the details of uplift modeling, but I'm going to tell you what it attempts to do. You see these 4, this quadrant here? You'll see on the top left it says sleeping dogs. On the top right it says lost causes. Bottom left, sure things. Bottom right, persuadables. All right, so if you have 100,000 people and divide it equally among those 25,000 apiece, let's say, the only ones you're going to end up targeting is persuadables. That's it. The other 75,000, you just let go. Now, I want you to think about without modeling, you don't know any of that. So what do? You throw something at 100,000 people and hope that the persuadables somehow will respond, but you don't even know that they're persuadables particularly. In this case, what uplift modeling does is it says, no, we can break it out so that you can identify explicitly who's who. And so what it says is, look, we're not going to look at a propensity to leave. We're going to look at the impact of an action on the customers. And most of these customers are not going to be responsive, but this group will be. And those are the ones that we're going to focus on based on that. And they looked at things like this: the billing systems, customer service data, sales and purchase data, and no real social data. And they came up with some incredibly serious numbers, right? And this is the result. And unfortunately, I'm really running through because of time, but this is the result. They were able to reduce churn 6.8% because of uplift modeling. 5% if they'd done it traditionally. 1.8% more with churn. Now, that sounds like a small percentage. Remember how many customers they have? If you put that across the whole thing, you're talking about almost 4 million customers. Of course, not everybody, but you get the point. In other words, this is a very large number of thousands and thousands of customers. They reduced the cost of their campaigns. They reduced churn. In other words, they succeeded substantially by taking big data, but they had a hypothesis, which was we're losing due to low-cost acquisitions. We got to come up with a program that will get these people back. Then we're going to figure out who we need to target. Then we'll figure out what data we need to use to find out who those targets are. Then we'll figure out the model we need to use to actually act on it, so analyze it, so we can find out the names of those people. Then we're going to address the offers to them. And it was a massive success, saving them millions and millions. So we're talking about the existence of success in the world of big data, which is a tough thing to deal with now because it is somewhat early, but there's enough success stories to begin to take action on this. If you're a small business, you'll think, okay, I still can't deal with it, and maybe you can't. Don't worry about it now, but hopefully you're planning on becoming a bigger business, right? So, and at some point, you will be dealing with it. I'm going to be around the rest of the day. If anyone would like to talk to me, you're certainly welcome. But remember this. If you don't actually take the data and act on it, then it's just big nothing. It's meaningless. So while it's out there, just treat it as an opportunity. Decide what you want to do with it. Then go do it. Thank you.